I'm Ashton Addison from EventChain for Investmentpitch Media and FinTech News Network. And today on Blockchain Interviews, we have Justin Rice, the head of ecosystem at the Stellar Development Foundation. Justin, welcome to the show, and thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Ashton.
Great. Well, I'd love to start off the interview by getting a little bit of background on what you and your team are working on at the Stellar Development Foundation and how that ties into the Stellar XLM blockchain.
Sure. Stellar is an open source, open participation blockchain network. Anyone can spin up a node and anyone can build a product that accesses the network, and anyone can issue an asset on the network. So it's really set up to make payments easy, specifically cross-border, cross-currency payments. The Stellar Development Foundation, which is the organization that I work for, is a nonprofit that attempts to support the growth and development of the network itself. Our goal in doing that is to create equitable access to the world's financial infrastructure. But a lot of what we do is basically try to make it so that an ecosystem of developers and businesses and products can build on the network and use it as a back-end settlement for cross-border and cross-currency payments. So as a foundation, a lot of what we do is we steward the code. So there is Stellar Core, which is the code that allows the computers on the network to interact and share a ledger and ratify changes to it, as well as Horizon, which is an API that allows developers to easily access it. We work on those and try to make them functional and make sure that they improve and that they continue to scale. So a lot of what we do is development time and energy and focus on those two things, like sort of the network level and the platform level on top of it. And then we also work with the ecosystem to educate them, to show people how to use Stellar, the network, to empower them, both by connecting them to each other and showing them the possibilities of the technology, and by providing support in the form of integration help and Lumen grants. And we also serve as like a speaking partner to the world at large, and to regulators and lawmakers.
Very cool, Justin. And the Stellar project has been around for quite a while, and I've been following it, but it's not as popular from the people that aren't really in cryptocurrency. You know, they've heard of Ethereum, some of them have heard of Ripple, and Stellar's right up there. And I'd love to hear, your take on why you like the Stellar project so much and what makes it unique in this space.
Good question. I think that Stellar has some really unique features that set it apart from other blockchains and that allow it to serve very specific purposes. As I mentioned, Stellar is really good for cross-border and cross-currency payments. And part of the reason that's true is that it has, as a fundamental feature, the ability to easily issue any kind of asset. So Stellar is a sort of supports all different assets. Any issuer can come and in a few lines of code issue an asset on the Stellar network that can be transferred and traded and bought and sold on the network itself. And it's also very easy to connect those digital assets to external existing financial rails so that you can very easily create a representation of a real currency that can be redeemed outside of the network for the underlying fiat currency that it represents. So the sort of features of Stellar as this network that supports all different currencies and makes it very easy to transmute and transfer and hold them is pretty unique. And it makes it a really great choice for any kind of payments solution.
That's really cool. And I know that you were actually working on a project within the Stellar ecosystem, StellarX, which is an exchange. Can you talk a little bit about, what was that experience like integrating with Stellar, and is the project running right now?
Yes, StellarX is an exchange interface that is built as like sort of an access point to the Stellar Decentralized Exchange. So one cool thing about Stellar is that in addition to allowing people to issue any asset and to hold a balance of any asset, to transfer any asset, the ledger also stores on the account level any offers to buy or sell the asset. So it has built into it order books, right? So you can offer to exchange any given asset on Stellar for another asset. And all of those orders are sort of like held on the ledger until they're closed, right? So they're just like a sort of centralized, but it's decentralized. So at the ledger level, these offers allow the creation of a shared pool decentralized exchange for all assets. Now, Stellar is a backend technology. It's really something that developers interact with via API. And the first project that I worked on Stellar is what you mentioned, StellarX. and it is essentially a browser, right, that connects via API to the Stellar network and gives users a front-end experience to interact with the Stellar decentralized exchange. So you can use it to like hold assets and to trade assets, and it shows you like the order books and trade histories. It's a lot like using any other kind of trading interface, say E-Trade or Thinkorswim or something like that. And it's very geared towards traders who want to take advantage of the Stellar decentralized exchange. And it was super fun to build on it because Stellar is really easy for developers to integrate a product. Like it has, you don't have to worry about building all of the backend. So if you're like a front-end developer or a product builder, you can really like envision almost anything that the ledger can do. And it's really easy to create to use the existing tooling and like hook it up to a cool interface that has a good user experience. So like it's just like a really seamless experience for a developer. And so that was definitely how I started working on Stellar, was designing, helping to work on a product. And it's just a really good environment for a product building.
That's very cool. And I'm curious on your take on the future of trading with decentralized exchanges versus centralized exchanges. It's been a hot topic, transitioning to decentralized exchanges, which are supposed to be better, but there's a lot of ways in which they're lackluster as well. You know, do you see that as a transition that's happening right now?
I think that decentralized exchanges are challenging to kickstart, right? Like you need to get the flywheel going, and that's not an easy thing to do. And the reason why that's true is because for an exchange to work, there has to be good liquidity, right? You have to be able to exchange one asset for another very easily, and you want to be able to have a lot of pairs with good liquidity in order to have it be a place where traders want to come and actually invest the time and energy trying to exchange the assets. And I think that like as decentralized exchanges get more and more users and sort of the network effect comes into play, you will have this moment when there's enough liquidity to sort of make them a more attractive option than a lot of centralized exchanges. And that's because they're not owned, there's not a single point of failure for them. The people who are trading on them, they actually own the assets that they're trading rather than trusting in some third party to custody those assets. And it's also possible for decentralized exchanges to have different interfaces that comply with local regulations. So I think that they can reach further into the world, which is part of how a network like Stellar gives more people access to the world's financial infrastructure.
Definitely. It seems like there's that you might need a little bit of extra technical expertise or take an extra step yourself, not having that full support of the centralized exchange, but it also allows you to maybe take advantage of opportunities that you wouldn't be able to that are in more early stage. And I think part of that mainstream adoption is having an ecosystem that allows you to create applications that can be accessed very easily by people that are non-technical. And you touched on it just a little bit earlier here about having the necessary building blocks for developers to make it easy to develop on Stellar. But could you just again reiterate, is it like system development kits and libraries? What kind of tools do you have available for developers to be developing on the ecosystem right now?
Yeah, at the sort of fundamental layer, Stellar is a program called Stellar Core, which again is what makes the network. It's how the nodes communicate with each other and keep track of and ratify the ledger. Most developers never have to touch that because on top of that layer, there's a really easy to use, well-documented API that gives you access to not only transact on the ledger, but also query the ledger for all the data, network data. But in addition to that, even on top of that, there are Stellar SDKs in, I think, 11 languages. So whether you're developing in JavaScript, Java, Go, Python, Ruby, you can download, and use this kit that is like sort of in the language of your choice. And all of those are also really, really well documented. So the tools available for developers to interact with the network are really diverse and really robust and really well documented. But in addition to like the network level of like sort of supplies and products and tools that people can use, there's also tooling that exists that to connect the network to existing financial rails. And so there's this whole world of specs. They're called Stellar ecosystem proposals that explain to developers how to build the APIs and tooling that connect to existing banking infrastructure in order to facilitate like network on and off ramps. And not only are there specs that explain how to do it, but there's also a reference implementation called Polaris that we have that you can download and like sort of use to spin up the servers or the clients that you need to facilitate those connections. So there's just like a ton of tooling to kickstart development, and everything is really set up to be self-serve.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to talk to anyone at the Stellar Development Foundation to get building on Stellar. You can really go find our documentation and start today, because it will walk you through the process from the beginning to the end.
Mm-hmm. That's great to hear, especially about all the different programming languages, and that really opens up the doors for many more developers. And I'm curious, because there are a lot of developers working on other mainstream blockchains as well. Do you have any incentivizations or encouragement for developers besides, having the libraries easy to use, to make sure that they're developing on Stellar rather than on something like Ethereum or a similar blockchain?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I would say that a lot of blockchain developers, I think it really behooves them to learn to develop on multiple blockchains. I think the future of a great blockchain developer will be someone who isn't limited to just working in like sort of one ledger, one backend. They'll understand them all. And I think that's where we're going to start to get great interoperation between chains, is when people have a broader understanding. However, we do have an incentive to get people to build on Stellar. It's a very direct one. So the SDF, the Stellar Development Foundation, we have sort of a supply of lumens, which is the network currency, but it's not ours to keep, right? We have promised this in a mandate, in a very public-facing mandate. We have plans to distribute it to very specific groups of people in order to foster and encourage development of the network. And one of those buckets in the mandate is the ecosystem support bucket. And a specific part of that is something called the Stellar Community Fund. So we have basically, it's almost like an ongoing hackathon. 4 times a year, people can enter into a contest that where they sort of make a proposal for something built on Stellar, or something that just furthers adoption of Stellar. So it could be content related too, but a lot of it is for developers. And they can win a Lumen Award for their project. And those Lumen Awards, ultimately, how they're divvied up is decided by the community, by a community vote. But it's actually, we give away 3 million lumens for quarterly. So it's ongoing, and it's a fairly significant pool. And it's really there to incentivize people to get building on Stellar.
Yeah, that's great. And hackathons are a great way to get the community together and also further the progress. So that is great to hear. And one thing you touched on there was having developers that can work on different ecosystems, and also because there's sort of this movement of the blockchain communities need to work together, and there's that notion of interoperability, of having different technologies that can work with each other. And I'm curious, from your perspective at the Development Foundation, how much interoperability is included in Stellar's direction towards helping grow the ecosystem? Is it really, if there is a possibility to have interoperability with other blockchains, is that something that Stellar has in mind?
That's a good question. I mean, I think fundamentally Stellar is set up to play nice with other blockchains. As I mentioned, you can issue any asset on Stellar, and that includes assets that represent sort of value on other blockchains. So you can actually issue a Bitcoin token on Stellar that represents Bitcoin on the Bitcoin network, or an Ether token on Stellar that represents Ether on Ethereum. And so I feel like in the design in and of itself, insofar as it's an asset neutral ledger, it really is set up with interoperability in mind. And that interoperability extends not just to fiat currencies and the existing financial institutions and financial rails, but also to more modern, distributed ledger technologies and crypto rails. I think that the idea of continuing to explore those connections is definitely really interesting to me. And I hope that I'm not the only one who thinks that, but that in general out there in the broader blockchain ecosystem, people are thinking about how we can work together versus against one another, or it's the sort of team of rivals idea.
Yeah.
Right? Like we all want to succeed, but I think we can all succeed by working together rather than picturing ourselves as being at odds.
Yeah, yeah, we're running out of time, Justin, but I'm curious on what comes next for your team at the Development Foundation. Do you have any major milestones that you're looking to hit throughout the rest of 2020?
Yeah, the next thing that will happen at the protocol level for Stellar is that we're going to release protocol version 14. And it has a couple of features that really are going to make it a lot easier to build user-friendly apps on Stellar. So I think over the next quarter, a lot of the sort of things, products, and changes and features that you'll see we're rolling out or that are getting rolled out on Stellar are there to make it so that people can build an app that looks and feels like a payment app, not like a crypto payment.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. And if there are developers or just viewers that are interested in getting involved with the Stellar community, what's the best way for them to learn more?
They should just go to stellar.org/developers. And once they're there, like they can sort of get rooted to the docs, or they can find a list of the different different channels that our community interacts with. I think the biggest one is Keybase. So, you can find links to the Stellar public Keybase there, but you can also find a list of all the other channels. So stellar.org/developers.
Great. Thanks so much for the time, Justin. All the best with the Stellar ecosystem moving forward, and let's follow up in the near future.
Awesome. Thanks, Ashton.